Darkcast Network. Indie pods with a dark side.
Autumn's Oddities is a strange and unusual podcast made by the strange and unusual, me, Autumn Gruby. Each week, I'll be taking you through some of the creepiest cases true crime has to offer. It won't only be true crime, I'll also be covering cryptids, haunted places, haunted things, and the true stories that inspired horror movies. Listen every Monday and Friday for new episodes. And remember, if it's creepy and weird, you'll find it here.
Devil is on his way. Devil is on his way, motherfucker. The devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way. Fall to your knees. Devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way.
Mountain Murders is an Appalachian true crime podcast. Some content may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
We say fuck a lot.
Hey, y'all. Welcome back to Mountain Murders.
I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
Hey, Dylan.
Hey, girl.
What's up, stranger?
You know.
I like seeing your face on a screen.
You like seeing my face on a screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your big, beautiful head.
I had to get a little distance between me and the camera.
For those who are listening in, we have been promising for a few years that we were going to start having like a video accompaniment, an accompanying video with our podcast episodes. And so today we are in the testing process. So you may or may not have access to a video of this episode.
Yeah.
We will see.
We need to...
we got to tweak it.
We need to stress the word testing.
We've been practicing. It's maybe not been going so well because we're not very tech savvy.
We get mad at each other when we try to figure out new things.
We do?
Sometimes.
I just get mad at you all the time. It doesn't have to be a new thing.
When a computer's involved, it seems to go downhill.
Well, I get mad at the computer, and then you just sit there like, looking all huffy and bored. I'm like, then leave.
I don't want to leave.
Then get on somewhere if you don't want to sit here while I do this.
I ain't got no place to go.
Okay, Mayo.
I'm like Richard Gere.
I'm going to kick you out of the naval officer school.
No.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Are you ready to get into today's episode, Dylan? We have, it's going to be another two-parter.
Oh.
We have another two-part episode coming your way, but it's a big case.
A big case full of big case stuff, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely, Dylan. Let's start. On May 5th of 1991, it was a warm Sunday in Lancaster County on the westbound side of the Pennsylvania Turnpike. A maintenance worker was emptying green cans at a rest area. He was looking for aluminum cans to sort, but when pulling the trash bag, it wouldn't budge. The maintenance worker was a pretty sturdy guy who had never had an issue emptying the barrels in the 6 years he'd been doing the job.
Right.
So he's over here kind of like wrestling with this garbage bag.
So obviously it's something rather heavy.
Yes, Dylan. So like a Russian doll, there was another bag every time he would open a bag to see what was inside. What is this, like a bowling ball in here or something?
It's another bag.
Yes. So he just keeps opening, and it's multiple bags. And at first he assumed it was a deer carcass. After opening 8 garbage bags, he couldn't determine what it was. He said, quote, "It looked like a loaf of bread, but then I saw freckles."
Oh my God. Why is that one of the worst descriptions I've ever heard?
Because it is. It is one of the worst descriptions you'll ever hear.
And I would be disturbed if my loaf of bread had freckles. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that right now.
Maybe it's oat bread.
I wouldn't think it's cute.
The man notified his supervisor, who called the Pennsylvania State Police. The worker had been an emergency medical technician before, so fortunately he was able to handle the situation. He ended up transferring the body to the morgue. Apparently, he was the only employee, like with this maintenance department, who was authorized to drive a truck. He was a bit startled when it was suggested that he might need to take an AIDS test after handling this body.
Okay.
Yeah. He hadn't come into contact with blood, but it was at a time when the health community was still learning about the disease. So that's also another kind of frightening element to this. Not only do you find a body, but they're telling you, hey, you may have to have some blood work done.
And I have to say, there was a lot of confusion around how AIDS was transmitted, what you could do, what you couldn't do. There was confusion all over the place.
Yeah, and misinformation.
Yeah.
People just weren't quite sure. Is it a bloodborne pathogen? Can it spread through the air? Is it airborne?
Can I get it from hugging someone?
Yeah.
A toilet seat.
State police were assigned to cases and jurisdictions that lacked a police department. In Rafo Township, this was the case. So an investigator with a criminal investigations unit was dispatched to this rest area, because we're talking about rural Lancaster County. Once you're outside of the city limits, is a very rural farm area. We've covered other cases in this kind of region and in this county. But it's fairly rural, so they don't even have a police department there.
Wow.
A dead, naked man with chest and neck wounds found in a trash can on the turnpike only about 30 feet from the road was a high priority event. In the city of Lancaster, there had been 13 murders in 1990. Beyond the city limits, crime was rare. The area was forested and farmland, not a place where people dumped bodies. The rest area was a barren strip on the edge of the woods. So again, rural area, not a lot of crime out here. Finding a body is a big deal, especially in this manner, in this condition.
Well, this is very odd. You have a body in a trash can in not that far off the road. So, it's going to be disturbing no matter where it's discovered.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would imagine finding a body no matter where is going to be disturbing, especially when someone describes it as it looks like a loaf of bread.
With freckles.
With freckles. Yeah. So not only did the victim seem emaciated with chest and back wounds, but his penis was severed and shoved into his mouth.
And that's a very telling thing, right? That's something.
What does that tell you?
Well, it tells me someone was very pissed off at this individual, and they're trying to send some kind of that's either an effort to humiliate them even after death, or to send a message or signal to other people, hey, look what I did to him, and I can do this to you as well.
It seems very personal.
It's very, very personal.
My first thought would be the victim knew the person who did this, because this seems very personal to me.
I agree.
Trooper Musser was assigned to the case, and he felt the murder was premeditated and deliberate, which I would say, if I were in his shoes, would probably think the same thing. Given the condition, the circumstances, the body was fresh, showing no signs of decomposition yet. There were no personal possessions or IDs in the bags. The victim was about 5'4", Dylan, and weighed no more than 100 pounds. So this was a fairly small man, very tiny. 5'4", it's not much taller than me.
And 100 pounds.
And yeah.
That's a small individual.
Well, I was going to say, you're always telling me I'm short.
Oh, it's true. You're basically, you're very short.
So 5'4" is not very tall, and then 100 pounds, that's a very frail, very small person. The precise cause of death was a mystery. The victim was quickly fingerprinted. Lividity suggested the body had been moved more than once. You know, that's kind of when a body is settled and the blood
settles.
sets and it kind of leaves a bruise, or it looks like bruising.
Like it would settle on the underside of a body if it's laying there, right?
Absolutely.
But then if it's that body's turned, then now that bruising or that lividity would be on the top.
Absolutely, Dylan. And since there was no rigor mortis, the officers believed the death had occurred no less than 36 hours earlier. 3 fresh bruises were on the victim's scalp, a large bruise on the forearm, and 1 on the shin. The stab wound on the back was between the right shoulder blade and the spine. The abdomen suffered the most severe trauma. There was a gaping oval-shaped wound just above. That was a stab wound, roughly about 3 inches in length. This is horrifying.
Yeah, it's terrible.
I mean, they were describing this gaping wound was almost like so large, you know, the internal parts of the body were sort of seeping out of it, like intestines and that kind of thing.
My God.
Yeah, it's a very severe trauma. The fatty sheath that holds the intestines to the body wall was perforated. The abdomen wounds were likely what killed the victim, and the severed penis, they determined, was post-mortem. A latent fingerprint examiner was given the 8 trash bags. Using cyanacrylate fuming, which is basically super glue, he developed 28 fingerprints and 3 palm prints from these trash bags.
Yeah, I've seen this actually.
It's really interesting.
Forensics files. It's like a chamber. It's like a box with the, clear glass all around, and then they flood the chamber once they put the items in there with this almost vapor, which is basically super glue, and it adheres to the oils from the body, and it makes a really nice crisp print.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. The prints were entered into the state database but got no hits. The prints were then sent to New York, Virginia, and New Jersey. There were still no matches. Though tips poured in, none of them were useful when it came to solving the identity of this John Doe. State police issued a sketch to be placed on the side of toll booths around the area, hoping that maybe someone driving through would recognize the victim. A National Guard unit, the 1st Troop Philadelphia City Cavalry, responded. The group was headed to Fort Indiantown Gap and believed the victim was one of their own. When they arrived at their destination, they had one member of this guard unit missing.
Oh, wow. Now, that's pretty smart with the toll booth.
I agree.
Because you're getting exposure to a lot of people. You have almost a captive audience there at the booth. They're going to look, if they're paying or making sure they can go through. And so that's a rather smart move.
I agree, Dylan. I think so as well. 5 days later, a truck driver stumbled upon 2 55-gallon trash containers in Chester County. Among the items in the trash barrels were clothing and traveler's checks. There was also a parking ticket issued in Philadelphia, 2 pieces of paper with names and phone numbers, mail-in bank checks and deposit slips, and an ID card confirming membership with that National Guard unit. So by now, National Guard dental records were a match. The John Doe was named as Peter Stickney Anderson, a 54-year-old resident of Philadelphia. Among the personal items was a woman's contact information. Troopers reached out to her. The woman admitted that she had seen Peter on Tuesday or Thursday before he passed away at the Blue Parrot. Now, it was a gay piano bar in Philadelphia located on Drury Lane. The same, just down the
That's
street.
where the Muffin Man
I was going to say,
lives.
just the same area where the Muffin Man lives.
Can I say a
Just down the street.
gay piano bar sounds amazing?
Yeah, we're going to talk at length about some gay piano bars.
It sounds
in and
like a
around
fun time.
New York and Philadelphia. And all I have to say is I'm jealous that I wasn't a gay man in the 70s and 80s in New York, because it sounds really fucking fun.
Right.
It really does. So it was learned that Anderson had an active social life, and he spent time in various gay bars in Center City, one of the areas of Philadelphia. And of all the establishments, the Blue Parrot was his favorite. Most of the drinkers were regulars, many of whom were active in the city's theater scene. The big draw on weekends at the Parrot was Michael Ogborn, a composer and lyricist who played piano and sang American standards in tenor. Peter was a regular who drank heavily and had lots of company. It was also learned that he had a second wife from whom he was separated and had been working as a portfolio manager at Mellon Bank, though at the time of his murder, he was unemployed. The case earned the nickname, quote, the banker in the barrel.
Damn.
And the media, they always come up with the most salacious names, headlines, nicknames.
Yeah, but I think this one was kind of lazy. I mean, I don't think it's that creative. It's not all that catchy. I mean, yeah.
Well, you can send a complaint to the newspapers.
You know, I was listening to a true crime episode the other day, and this guy was kept slipping in and out of these kind of little bodega stores and killing people. And they were trying to track the person on like CCTV, if you will. Okay. And so they finally figured out it was a guy with a duffel bag. That's how because he was using like a rifle in the crimes. And they were like, how's this guy getting around the city with a rifle? You know,
yeah.
Nobody noticing. So finally they see this person with like a black hoodie and like a duffel bag. And so the media names this guy Duffel Bag John Doe. I was like, what?
That's a lazy
dude.
That's a lazy name.
That is a journalist who partied all weekend and was not preparing for the week and came in on Monday. He's like, oh my God, what am I going to call this new killer? And someone's like, hey, how about Duffel Bag John Doe?
So you're saying this journalist could possibly have been you?
Yeah, that sounds like something I would do last minute.
I agree. Yeah. So Peter was born in 1937. Let's talk a little bit about him. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I can never say Milwaukee without thinking of Alice Cooper saying Milwaukee.
Did he say Milwaukee?
In Wayne's World.
Oh,
he's all like, you know, it's Milwaukee or whatever. Anyway, so you don't even get the reference. He was well-educated and raised by well-educated parents. His mom and dad were graduates of MIT and Wellesley College. So those are two prestigious New England colleges. And then he was raised in Pittsburgh along with a younger sister. He attended Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, where he studied government. He was involved with the Young Republicans, a yacht club, and a car club. He had been a member of the Psi Upsilon fraternity, known for being kind of party guys and slackers. So I'm thinking, you know, maybe they were a lot like the guys in Animal House. And while the rest of the all-male student body partied with girls on the weekends, Peter stayed in his room writing. There was no suspicion at the time that he was gay. One female recalled, quote, he just wanted to be part of the boys, but described Peter as being kind of incredibly lonely. Like he desperately wanted to fit in and hang out with his peers, but he also didn't, I guess, quite fit in with them because he wasn't, you know, chasing girls and partying with the ladies at the colleges and that kind of thing.
That's because he wanted to chase boys.
Maybe.
Now, no, but have you ever seen someone that seems like they can be lonely even in a room full of people?
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you mean.
Yeah, and that's kind of sad when you see that.
He also wanted to appear to be moneyed like most of the other students at the elite college. Appearances were quite important to Peter. Like even as an adult, he really wants to fit into high society. Investigators were led to a 26-year-old man named Tony Brooks, who was running for a seat on the Philadelphia City Council. He told state troopers that on May 3rd, he and Anderson went to a fundraiser, like a dinner, in Manhattan, New York. And as far as troopers could tell, Brooks was the last person to see Anderson alive. Anderson resided in a condo at the Wanamaker House, which was 2 blocks off Rittenhouse Square. It was considered a ritzy domain for the rich. It was also near City Center, where there were many gay and lesbian-friendly establishments. During the 1950s, and Dylan, I think history is going to play... We need to talk a little bit about history because I think history involving the LGBTQ community is going to play a vital role in this case.
Right.
So during the 1950s, the police commissioner in Philadelphia was a guy named Frank Rizzo. Why does that sound like the most classic police commissioner name?
Because it sounds like something out of a Batman comic.
It does.
I mean, it really does. It's
Frank
perfect.
Rizzo.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this police commissioner terrorized the gay community, purposefully raiding establishments that were friendly to queer people. Queer people were eventually driven outdoors, and Rittenhouse Square was considered this sort of 7-acre open-air club at the time where meeting spots were chosen out of necessity. Peter's condo was messy. When they went to explore the condo and do a search, they knew that it was, obviously a bachelor lived there. It was kind of messy, maybe not that well kempt.
How messed up is that?
Oh,
That a city official is going to use the tools of the city that are supposed to serve and protect the citizens to harass and harm and threaten and scare people.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this police commissioner was known for raiding these bars, arresting people,
Cracking heads.
beating them,
Right, clubs.
like nearly killing people, putting them in the hospital simply because they were out seen dancing in a bar with someone of the same sex.
It's so ridiculous.
It's incredibly ridiculous.
I've never understood people being mad at other people for being gay. I've just never, it never clicked for me. It is when I first realized what that really meant as a kid, 6, 7, 8 years old, maybe, it just was ridiculous to me then. It never made sense. I never understood people that got mad about other people and what they did.
Yeah, I never understood that either. And I would say I was around that same age, I think, when I kind of realized what being gay meant, or that there were same-sex couples.
Right.
I had an art teacher in elementary school, and I adored him. I mean, he was like beloved by kids. Everybody loved him. And he was gay. He was homosexual. And of course, back then, teachers were pretty private about their lives. I mean, you didn't know if a teacher was married, divorced, had kids. You didn't know any of that
They
stuff.
didn't discuss that.
They didn't
stuff.
discuss it. I mean, everything was kind of just...
They're just your teacher.
There were no nonsense about it.
Yeah.
But, everyone in the community knew that this gentleman was homosexual. I mean, it was kind of known or whatever. And there were people, I would hear people like parents and adults talking about him, and they would say negative things. And I'm a kid in this class, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, he's awesome.
He's the best teacher ever.
We love him. He was awesome. He did clowning. Like, he was a professional clown.
Okay.
And so anytime there were festivals or events, or we would have little like fall festivals, or we had this little event at our elementary school called like Razzle Dazzle, and it was like this whole art day on a Saturday, and it was super fun. And he would always be there with like other, adults who did clowning, and they'd be juggling and balloons, and just, it would be so fun. I mean, I thought he was the coolest guy, and I just could not understand, like, why would you be mad at this man? He's awesome.
Now,
Why do you care what he's doing,
Yeah. The kids were scoring a big extra with the clowning thing, because that's a serious business.
No, really.
Truly being a clown. You don't just throw a little makeup on and a funny
he had
nose.
like professional training. I mean, he was such an awesome man.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
I still, like, when I think of my favorite teachers over the years, like, he definitely pops in my head. Because he was just a really fun art teacher, and just so nice and kind, and kids, we all just loved him. No, I never heard a bad thing about him.
But we do remember growing up in the 90s, late 80s, 90s, that gay people were openly mocked and discriminated against in public and entertainment,
media,
and music, movies, on the news. I mean, it was a crazy
ridiculous
time.
Because, I mean, why do you care? Why are you so invested in what someone else is doing?
And back then, the mantra was live and let live and treat everyone the same. That doesn't seem to be okay now mindset, because a lot of people have picked that apart, but I thought it was a pretty good mindset personally.
Things just seem to look like in some ways maybe better then, but then we have
it
these
seemed to
issues,
be getting better. You see what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, it seemed like we
it
were
was
striving toward a goal of
Right.
having kind of equality, and that somewhere along the way that's kind of broken down.
Well, now they've tricked us into, and we'll get back to the story, but they've tricked people, society, into segmenting themselves back into little boxes, separating. Celebrate, they always talk about our differences when we have a lot more similarities as a citizen, right? My neighbor's much more alike is like me than they are different. There's very few small things that make us different, but we all want the same basic things for a community. And so now I think that's the big trick. Now they're pushing us up back into these little boxes and all these little subgenres, and I think that's a bad way to go about it.
Yeah, like now everybody wants labels.
Yeah.
Where back in the day we really
Labels were bad.
We tried to break labels, like, hey, you're not just this thing. Like Dylan's not just one thing. Dylan's all these things.
He's not just
right?
an incredibly handsome, smart guy. He's these other things.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So the bathtub, for example, was filled to the brim with magazines in this apartment.
That's weird.
Yeah, well, troopers wondered, like,
Where do you take a bath?
where did he bathe?
Yeah.
There were obvious indications that sex had occurred recently at the condo, and this partner, the person that he'd most recently had sex with, they were actually able to locate this person, and he was found living with a girlfriend, like, in town. They located blood on the ceiling at that individual's apartment, but determined it was residue from where the man and his girlfriend were shooting heroin.
I was going to say, I bet they're shooting up drugs. That's something that happens. It spurts out of your vein. It goes on the wall.
Right.
And the
So, but there was nothing there, like no indication that this man or his girlfriend had been involved in Peter's murder. Investigators made their way to New York to chat with the person who had hosted the fundraiser in a grand Upper West Side apartment that was overlooking Central Park. Perhaps Peter had met the killer at this fundraiser. That's what police are kind of hoping for, because at this point, I mean, they don't really have much to go on. Right? The host, a real estate agent named Brown, held queer-related social issues close to his heart after losing his brother, a Yale graduate and Vietnam pilot, to AIDS earlier. No one seemed to care about his brother, and therefore he felt like a deep connection to help others, especially in this community, because at the time, AIDS is going to also kind of play a part in our story. It was everywhere, and we didn't know a lot about it at the time. It was heavily stigmatized, and our own government sort of turned their back on these people and didn't want to help them. I mean, it was a major crisis. You've seen the Dallas Buyers Club.
Well, yeah, that's true story. That's real.
True story, exactly. Now, Brown was also gay, but he told investigators that he'd remained celibate, claiming it saved his life as most of his social circle was dead due to the virus.
And see, even the treatment of being pushed by the government later on was thought to be more toxic than helpful to the people who were taking it. Gosh, I mean, we could talk for hours about what was happening during this part of American history. And it was terrible. And it was the last thing they were trying to do was help people.
Absolutely. And our story is really, we're going to talk about much of the history and what was happening at this time. Because all of that, I think, plays a bigger part in our story.
And yeah, Anthony Fauci had a huge hand in that. Oh, another big event in American history.
Cool. You should put your mask on.
Whoops.
Now, Brown made an effort to be around gay people and support them, mainly because of, these reasons that, his brother and losing all of his friends. So a man named Anthony Hoyt had been at the party and left with Peter. They located him. He was grilled. He submitted to a polygraph exam and passed. It was determined that he'd actually known Peter from years earlier when they had been roommates together. So around 1961, Peter had moved to Manhattan. He met Hoyt at a bar, and Hoyt had a room available in his apartment and offered Peter a place to live. Hoyt recalled to investigators that he and Peter had, quote, quite a romance. He said, quote, he always wore a bow tie, and I'll remember that always. And in every photo, Peter does have on a bow tie.
Well, yeah, and the bow tie guy always stands out,
I love a bow tie.
I think the people that can pull
a bow tie is a great look.
The people that can pull it off and have the guts to be the one person with a bow tie when 100 people have a tie on, I think it's amazing.
Yeah, I think the bow tie is a great look. So the two men were firmly in the closet at this time. Neither had any same-sex experiences, but soon developed a physical relationship. He admitted a lot of alcohol was consumed, as it took courage for them to stop pretending. He said, quote, in those days you weren't gay. Gay was not good. So the pair hid their relationship from everyone, including their close friends. In the mid-1960s, Hoyt married a woman and moved out, but the friends stayed in touch. Now, in 1969, Peter proposed to Sandy Blake, the daughter of a socialite. Her mother knew immediately that Peter was a social climber and that the marriage gave him entry into New York's high society as well as Martha's Vineyard, because Sandy Blake's mother owned property on Martha's Vineyard. And Peter immediately, upon introduction to the mother, quickly, attached himself to her and kind of made a beeline for the daughter.
Oh, gosh.
Like, because it was a way to get into this world.
I don't know if I want to get into a world that bad.
In 1970, Peter and Sandy married, and eventually the pair divorced a decade later when Sandy realized the marriage was more about Peter's eagerness to get ahead. She had learned by then that he was gay, and when confronted him about it, Peter just didn't respond. He shut down. He wouldn't answer any questions. He still was very private about it, even with his wife.
That's a really good technique to use. When someone asks you a question that makes you uncomfortable or you don't want to answer, you just say nothing.
Does not work out well.
It works great. Works great.
By 1979, Peter had married for the second time, and her name was Cynthia Reed. They had a son together, and by all accounts, living an outwardly traditional life. Friends presumed that Peter was gay, but they didn't bring it up. Reed discovered evidence of Peter's homosexuality because he had a large magazine collection.
Of not Playboys.
Not Playboys. And although they separated, Cynthia and Peter remained friendly, and they had no real intentions of divorce, according to Cynthia. When Cynthia received a phone call from Peter, who had been hospitalized, at the time he had lost 40 pounds, Cynthia said, quote, "It was perfectly evident to me that he might be HIV positive." Even at the time of his death, Peter was living life in the closet. Tony Brooks said, quote, "He was your classic mainline gentleman." It was difficult, Brooks noted, for Peter to live openly due to his generation and also his social circle.
And that's so sad that he feels it necessary to do that. It really is.
According to multiple sources, Peter was a pretty bad alcoholic. Investigators learned that at the fundraiser, Peter was, quote, wasted. He and Hoyt decided to keep the party going over cocktails, and Peter had suggested a bar on East 58th called the Townhouse. He continued drinking at the Townhouse until the bartender cut him off. That's when Peter suggested to Hoyt that they go back to his place. Hoyt lied, saying he had house guests, and instead Hoyt booked a room for his friend at the Waldorf Astoria. Placing Peter in a cab, Hoyt gave the driver directions, and that was the last time he would see Peter alive. Now, at the hotel, the Waldorf Astoria, Peter sexually assaulted a security guard by, grabbing his buttocks. He was, pinching this dude's butt.
Damn, Peter's out of control, bro.
Well, he's very, very, very intoxicated.
Yeah,
and
that's not good.
Well, the employee told him that staff members didn't, quote, come with the room.
Oh, well, that's a good way to put it. You don't own me, you son bitch.
So at this point, Peter never checks into the hotel, and it seems like maybe the security guard removes him from the hotel lobby and puts him back out on the street, and Peter gets in a cab and leaves the area. So investigators theorized that Peter sought out another bar in the city, and his friend Hoyt thought that he might have been so intoxicated he forgot he was kicked out of the Townhouse and possibly returned to that bar.
Tried to go back there.
Because that was kind of like his favorite bar in the city. Trooper Musser with the Pennsylvania State Police retired in 1992, and Peter's case went cold. No one could account for his movements after leaving the Waldorf Astoria. And in the end, there were no suspects. So they were left wondering what happened after Peter left the hotel. And Dylan, this is the thing, and this will come up again in the case, when you have almost like these crimes where there are multiple locations involved, you get into these jurisdiction issues, because he's from Philadelphia, he's found in Lancaster County, but he was previously in New York City. So that's multiple agencies involved. So then it becomes kind of an issue of so who's going to take on the investigation?
Right.
And is the NYPD going to cooperate with us? Because I know that the Pennsylvania police, we watched a Max documentary called Last Call, when a serial killer stalked queer New York. It's a multi-part docuseries. These Pennsylvania investigators say that they felt like they weren't getting a lot of cooperation from the NYPD because the crime happened, because the crime scene was in Pennsylvania. But yet they're from out of town. So they're like, when we show up in New York, we don't really know where to go,
No informants.
which areas we should be looking in. Like, we don't know where the gay bars are in the city where we can take his photo and try to question people, and that the NYPD just didn't seem very helpful in solving the case.
Well, and another good point you made was most police jurisdictions don't volunteer to say, yeah, that body, that homicide case you have is probably from our jurisdiction.
It's true.
And so because they take ownership of it, it goes on the city stats, and that's not really direct hate or discrimination towards that one particular case. They're going to do that with every case. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, they don't want to give up their resources because they already have their own issues.
They already have
we know, especially during the 80s, 70s, 80s, and even into the early 90s, New York City was known for its crime, high crime.
So they got plenty of other unsolved
homicides. So they
homicides.
have a lot on their plate, and they're not trying to allocate resources to this murder that they feel like this is a Pennsylvania crime.
Right.
However, a call from the New Jersey State Police later that year would revive Peter's case. They were investigating a murder, Dylan. New Jersey used a VICAP questionnaire to see if there were similar crimes in other jurisdictions. There had been a match. See, New Jersey police had also found a man in a barrel stuffed into garbage bags. He was last known to be at the Townhouse, this gay piano bar in New York City, in the days before his death.
Wow.
Realizing a killer was lurking out there who was extremely dangerous motivated the New Jersey police to apprehend him. And we all know VICAP is the violent crime apprehension. It's like a database. And I know it was used in the Sam Little case, where they're able to enter violent crimes, and see if there are matches to other violent crimes, possibly in other areas, to see if there could be a pattern.
So you basically put a description of your crime out there.
Yes.
And other police departments will see it, read it, and see if you get a hit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, on July 10th of 1992, two New Jersey Department of Transportation employees were working the day shift, which took them to Southampton Township, a heavily wooded area 2 hours south of Manhattan. At an area known as Butler's Place, the men found several DOT trash cans, which were 55-gallon drums with plastic liners. They wrapped and tied the bags, then loaded them into the truck. One of the employees sensed something was off after noting there were multiple bags piled around one specific barrel. Now, one bag was incredibly heavy, and this worker said it felt like it contained a pumpkin. When you carve a pumpkin and you clean out the guts of the pumpkin.
Right.
It's kind of dense and heavy and kind of mushy. I mean, just the thought of it kind of grosses me out a little bit.
Just even seeing someone pick a bag like that up, and you just see all this
mush
kind of making this big ball in the bottom of it.
Ugh. Plus that word mush is just kind of gross.
Mush.
I can't think of something else to say, but mush. Yeah.
Moist mush. Ugh.
So we got this mushy bag that weighs about 400 pounds. And when they noticed a few of the bags were leaking, it looked like they were leaking blood. Freaky. I don't want to see a trash bag bleeding blood.
I would be blown away if I saw something like this.
Well, sadly, Dylan, this wasn't out of the ordinary in this part of New Jersey. They had their share of mafia hits where bodies were dumped in similar circumstances. And there was a nearby recreation area where fishing was popular, and the cans often contained waste from the fishing trips. One of the workers said, quote, "It's probably just a dead fish. Don't worry about it." Everything was thrown into the back of this garbage truck. At the maintenance yard, the bags were unloaded. Luker, one of the employees, saw a bag with a pinkish hue. And again, this is the guy who just doesn't feel right about the situation. The entire time he's had little spidey senses going on.
Well, here's the thing. If it's fish guts and, pieces.
That's a big ass fish.
Well, it's a big ass fish, which I thought that's a big ass fish. And it's going to smell very fishy. And that's going to have a very obvious fishy odor. So I'm guessing this is absent that, unless it just smells terrible. and you can't really put your finger on what the smell is.
Yeah, a smell wasn't really mentioned. It was mostly just
Visuals.
the bag is bleeding and the bag has a pink issue. So again, he's just not feeling right about this, and curiosity led him to open the bag, and that's when he shouted, quote, "I found a man's head."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. That's not okay. I don't want to find a person's head. Do you want to find a severed head in a bag?
No.
Not me, bud.
That's a thing of nightmares.
The workers called state police. Only a few hours later, 2 more trash men were on the Garden State Parkway doing similar work. One of the barrels was too heavy to lift. The employee pulled a bag out of the barrel. The bag ripped, and a human leg kind of fell out of the bag. Yuck. Detective Matthew Kuhn was assigned to the case. He was known as a real by-the-book kind of officer. He was 8 years into his career, so he's actually like a perfect investigator for this case, because he does not leave a detail. He does not leave a T uncrossed and an I undotted kind of guy, right?
Okay.
He's a real just by-the-book guy. So he's a real thorough investigator. Now, the head was examined first. It was severed at the 4th cervical vertebra through the vocal cords. Detectives could actually see the spinal cord.
Wow.
A second bag held a set of arms, dismembered at the shoulder joints. The third bag contained intestines, a blood-stained shower curtain, surgical gloves, and a Liz Claiborne brand king-size fitted sheet, along with 4 straight, dark-colored hairs. A fourth bag held the upper torso, the abdomen severed just below the navel. The fifth bag held the lower abdomen and pelvis, and the final bag held legs, which appeared to be cut at the femur. Also discovered among the body parts was an additional brown plastic shopping bag with words, "Thank you for shopping here." And there were several copies of the New York Times, the New York Post, and the New York Daily News, which seemed to be kind of placed around the wounds. It almost makes me think of how like a butcher wraps meat.
Yeah, and like
this newspaper was kind of wrapped around several of the body parts, almost like to stop the bleeding or
just packaged up.
Yeah, kind of like the Cleveland torso killer, just packaging it up. They also located a compass saw. Now, Dylan, do you know what a compass saw is? I'm not familiar with a compass saw.
I don't know exactly. I've never actually heard that that type of saw.
Okay, well, just looking it up, I mean, it kind of looks like a handheld saw, but the blade is really small, like maybe only 2 inches at the largest, and then it goes down like tiny. So it's kind of an angled saw, and it's a really thin saw. So I'm imagining it's a kind of precise, like a very small, precise type of saw.
Oh, but it's a hand saw.
It looks like a hand saw.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, I'm not real familiar with it, but just looking it up, that's kind of how I would describe it. Now, 3 years before, this same, law enforcement agency had a woman's head turn up on a golf course, and the legs were discovered in a river about 55 miles north of where the head had been. It turns out she was a victim of serial killer Joel Rifkin.
Oh.
Which we covered here on Mountain Murders. Now, an autopsy was performed in Newark, New Jersey. There was a series of wounds near the left nipple and 4 by the heart, a perforation by the abdominal cavity, and a 3rd on the left side of the abdomen. All were stab wounds. The wounds were incurred peri-mortem, which meant the victim had been alive during this vicious stabbing. The arms had been disarticulated rather than dismembered, and removing an arm in this manner required dexterity. You're cutting through ligaments in the shoulder, which is a lot more difficult than just going through bones.
So this basically unattached.
Yeah.
At the joints?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So they knew the killer had been strong and needed a good knowledge of anatomy, because this would be a really physical thing to do.
And a very precise thing.
Yes, and they must know anatomy, so they have to have some kind of surgical, medical, mortuary, some kind of background in that field. to know.
Basically, anyone, for whatever reason, could take a saw to a body and try to cut it up. But you'd have to have quite a bit more knowledge to disarticulate it in this manner.
Yes.
Okay.
There were rope burns around the wrist, which suggested the victim had been bound. The victim's death was caused by the stab wounds to the chest and abdomen, which penetrated the heart, lungs, the mesentery, and the stomach. The toxicology screen would show the victim had a blood alcohol level of 0.230, so 23%, which was well above the legal limit, 0.23%.
Yeah, it's nearly 3 times the legal limit in most areas.
Now, among the items in the barrel were a briefcase and a wallet containing the victim's identity. 57-year-old Thomas Richard Mulcahy of Sudbury, Massachusetts. Detectives knew Mulcahy had been like hogtied, because again, he's been bound, but they could tell it was like the hogtied, which is typically like the hands and feet tied behind the back together, which is not a comfortable position to be in. No,
I would hate to be put in that position.
Yeah, same. They were also looking for a killer who was male due to the strength required to be able to pull this off, and also someone with a medical background. So that's kind of giving them maybe some idea of who their suspect might be or what they're looking for. Also, separating bones from joints would take time. It's a very time consuming. They're saying it could take hours. So that required a private workspace. Detectives knew that a dismemberment could take 6 hours or more, just based on other cases where the perpetrator has admitted it took them 6, 8, 10 hours to dismember a body. So they're like, hey, wait a minute. These cuts are precise. There's little blood in the garbage bags. So this perpetrator is likely experienced, having done this before. This was obviously not the work of a new killer because it was so precise. And this person needs a private area to be able to do this, drain the blood, because there's virtually no blood.
It's like, why?
It's like little bits of blood.
Why are you even doing this, too? I mean, honestly, because you can say it's for disposal, but all these bodies are being discovered. You're putting them in maintained receptacles. Someone's going to come by and collect this.
It's like this person wants these bodies to be found.
Yes, and it's like the
perpetrator is like purposefully trying to put these bodies in an obvious place.
And it's like the dismemberment and the disarticulation is not about concealment. It's about something else. Like they enjoy doing that part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, like the act itself.
Right. God, I mean, who in the world would want to cut a human body up?
Well, I know one thing, Dylan. They ain't right. They ain't right. Now, the rest area was a secondary crime scene, a dumping spot. The lack of evidence would prove difficult. Detective Kuhn said, quote, "We felt whoever had done this felt that his connection to Thomas Mulcahy would never come back to him."
Okay.
So Thomas Mulcahy's wife of 3 decades was growing nervous after he had failed to show up for dinner. He had been on a trip to New York City. They hadn't spoken in 2 days. Mulcahy had been staying at the Barbizon, a hotel that was not far from Radio City Music Hall and the Rainbow Room, which was one of his favorite spots. A check of Tom's room showed his clothes were left behind. They were able to contact a colleague who seemed surprised to hear that Tom had not returned to Sudbury. Finally, Margaret contacted the police department and reported her husband missing. Sudbury police didn't immediately file a missing persons report, which Margaret couldn't understand. But moments later, the New Jersey police had contacted the Sudbury department to say they had found Tom Mulcahy. So it's almost like these law enforcement agencies are sort of making contact with each other while she's there trying to file a report. And she's feeling like they're kind of pushing her aside or they don't care, but it's because they've figured out, wait a minute, this is her husband, and they're trying to figure out a way to like break this news to her and find out what's going on exactly.
Yeah, there's a lot happening behind the scenes that she doesn't realize. It's not only are they not pushing you away, they're trying to figure out how to tell you there's been a big development.
Right. So they basically have to tell her, like, your husband's not missing, your husband is dead. I mean, which, who can...
All law enforcement says
that would be
that is the worst.
terrible news to deliver.
Yeah, that is one of possibly the hardest part of the job, is telling loved ones that the missing person or whoever is dead. We found them dead.
Detectives accessed Tom's business records and the expense reports, which tracked down nearly 5 years of his previous trips to New York City. And from there, they were kind of able to outline establishments that he frequented when he was in the city, places he may have gone, which made it a little easier to go around with his photo and say, hey, have you seen this guy? They have a more of an idea of where he went around, which with the Peter Anderson case, they had no clue where to start.
Well, and in a big city like that, you have to have a starting point, or the odds of getting any pertinent information are zero.
Tom had been employed since 1960 with the same computer company, Bull HN Information Systems. He had been in international sales, which took him all over the globe, including the firm's headquarters in Paris. And he often traveled to Japan. So he's like a jet setter. He's globe-trotting, has this kind of fancy job, gets to travel.
I would go to both of those places.
I'm jealous.
Back then.
I know, right? Described by coworkers as being optimistic, he was always kind to people, complimentary, and had a sense that everything was just wonderful. I mean, people said you just like couldn't bring him down. Like no matter what was happening, his outlook on life was just, it's just a fantastic, we're all here, we're alive, and things are good.
Well, that's a great outlook to have. I don't always feel like that. Sometimes I do.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, I mean, he sounds like a very lovely, like a very pleasant person to be around.
Right.
And probably the kind of man that like makes you feel like just being good in his presence because he's so positive and optimistic. Now, married for over 30 years, Tom had 4 children and by all accounts lived a very successful life, had a really nice house, great family, great career, and things were good for him. His wife knew that Tom was gay. And being Irish Catholic, Tom kept this secret, but stayed extra days on business trips. And his wife knew this was sort of to be able to take the time to peruse the gay bars and clubs in other cities, because this was something he couldn't do at home. Margaret had found a card, like a business card from one of the bars a year earlier, and confronted him, and they had gone to marriage counseling. She said Tom was also an alcoholic who preferred whiskey, and he was the kind of guy that just didn't know when to stop drinking. Like he couldn't cut himself off, even when he was drunk. Like he just kept drinking and drinking and,
Well, yeah, and that's a bad thing to do. Well, and alcohol instantly attacks your, decision-making abilities and all that. And anyone that has a tendency to be like this when they drink, it's almost like the worst thing you could do is drink. I mean, I know it sounds simple and stupid, but that's just the truth of it.
Margaret was upset over Tom's drinking by 1992, which was out of control. And she also knew about his preference for men. And their kids could sense something was troubled in the marriage, but they didn't know the details. And so the kids always kind of felt that Margaret was being too harsh and critical of their father, but they didn't understand there were underlying reasons for this.
Well, because it sounds like their father's behavior is what, and not just the being gay, which is unfortunate to be living in this relationship when you can't really give yourself to someone. You know what I mean? I can only imagine what that would be like. But then his other behaviors, the drinking way too much, the dishonesty, if you will. That's what's causing the friction. Well, is a lot of their father's behaviors.
Well, and it seems like Tom, I mean, his wife will say, like, she knew, like, he loved her. He cared for her. And they had a good marriage. And he was a good husband. And they were very close. But there was just this intimacy, I guess, that he needed from this companionship that he needed from men.
Right.
Tom's mother had immigrated from Ireland in 1920 and had settled in Boston. He was born on July 24th, 1934. His mother was well into her 30s by then. They lived in Brighton, a working-class neighborhood in Boston. His father had died before Tom's 3rd birthday, And his mother didn't have much of an education, so she spent her career working just like these menial, low-paying jobs to support her only child. And despite their poverty, his mother focused on educating Tom at the best schools, which included Boston College High School, an all-male preparatory school. One of Tom's classmates was William Bulger, brother of Whitey Bulger.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. And William Bulger said, quote, "I think of Tom favorably. He was a good person. You'll never hear anyone say otherwise." And again, Boston was no different from Philadelphia in the 1950s and 60s. Law enforcement raided gay clubs regularly. And of course, no one at this time knew that Tom was gay. It was heavily stigmatized. He was in the closet. He was accepted at Boston College, where he majored in psychology. And it was at Boston College that Tom began drinking. And as a friend said, quote, "Mulcahy, he would drink with the best of us." So it sounds like he had a lifelong problem with alcohol. I mean, his entire adult life.
Yeah.
And it began in college.
Well, yeah, and that's where I would think it begins for a lot of young people, because finally you're out from under your parents' observation or their rules and all that mess, and now you can get to do what you want. And a lot of times people, that's why I think that you should talk to your kids about, if you're going to do this, this is how you do it in a more responsible manner, because just being a hard ass, never ever, threatening them, they're eventually going to get a chance to do those things. And I think it's good to at least have discussions about how you do that, the do's and don'ts of alcohol, if you will.
Well, I also think it's interesting that both of our victims are these gay men of a certain age who've lived essentially closeted lives. And both seem in some ways like torn or deeply unhappy, maybe because they've had to settle into this.
They're living a lie.
Yeah. I was going to say living a fake life. I don't know if that's exactly how I would call it, but they're not able to live as free as they would want.
Well, yeah,
a lot of people who are sad or unhappy or have issues, depression, it drives them to drink. So I think maybe these men were both masking, both Peter and Tom were masking an unhappiness or an unfulfillment in their lives by drinking.
I think it's true.
They were masking a pain or something, right? Well, he continued his psychology studies after graduating. He went to Fordham University in the Bronx. And while he was in New York, he worked at the Stork Club as a waiter, which was, I guess, kind of a hot spot in New York. Kind of sought after. You made a lot of money if you worked there, but it was a place that also had mafia ties.
Oh, wow.
And people who knew him at the Stork Club described him as just being like an excellent waiter because he was so personable and he was really handsome. So women were attracted to Tom. While he was employed at the Stork Club, these mafia guys would talk about how these women would just sort of throw themselves at him and he had nothing to do with them. And they would be like, "What are you doing?"
Well, they didn't know.
Right. But at that point, he had already met his wife, his Margaret, the woman who would become his wife. And she was back home in Massachusetts. And so he would say, "Well, I have a girl at home." And so that's kind of how he explained not being interested in these women.
That made them want him even more.
Yeah. It sounds like it.
He's a good one.
So Margaret and Tom married in 1958. On July 8th of 1992, Mulcahy attended a sales presentation at the World Trade Center at Tower 1. He went to lunch afterwards with a coworker where they had a few drinks. The coworker actually said, quote, "We got shit-faced." So after this business presentation, you go to a business lunch, you have some business drinks, and then it's business time.
That's right.
Now at 3 p.m., Tom said goodbye to his coworker and proceeded on to the next bar to continue drinking. With Peter's investigation underway, detectives had the Townhouse bar on their radar. It was there that a man named Gibson told police that he had actually seen Tom at the bar and the pair had socialized. Tom seemed to be making eyes at another man and eventually paired off with him. And the next time Gibson kind of came around, Tom and this man had left together. Since Gibson was one of the last people to see Tom alive, he became a top suspect. What saved him was a bartender confirming that Mr. Gibson had stayed until closing time, which was long after Tom had departed. And the police also learned that Mr. Gibson didn't own a car. Therefore, it would be tricky to transport a body out to New Jersey without the proper transportation.
Well, yeah.
Because you're probably going to need a private vehicle to move a body from New York to New Jersey.
That'd be hard to catch a cab with a body.
Right?
Yeah.
A body in multiple garbage bags?
Right. That are leaking, likely.
Ooh, yeah.
And also, where would he go to dismember and disarticulate the body?
Theories ran the gambit, including that Tom had gambling debts, that maybe he'd gotten in trouble with the wrong people in Atlantic City, or this could be some kind of mafia hit. But a thorough examination of his finances proved otherwise. I mean, he had excellent finances, according to detectives. DNA was extracted from a latex glove found among this discarded material. The FBI database, unfortunately, yielded no results. They found the sheet was sold at JCPenney and Macy's stores between 1985 and 1986.
The Elizabeth Taylor collection.
Liz Claiborne.
Liz Claiborne,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
The shower curtain was found at Kmart for $14.99. And remember there was like a shopping bag?
Yeah. That said, thank you for shopping
Yes.
with us.
Well, guess what? They were able to trace that bag to a CVS store on Staten Island. And that compass saw, was traced to Pergament, which is a chain of home improvement stores. They had 32 branches in New York and New Jersey. However, using the SKU number, they were able to determine that this Pergament store was across the street from the CVS in Staten Island.
Ah.
So now
Wow.
detectives are beginning to think the killer resides or works on Staten Island.
Wow, they're doing some pretty good, pretty nifty investigating with what they have to work with.
Yeah. So with the news of Peter's murder, detectives began thinking that Tom's death was the work of a potential serial killer. So now we have these two men dumped in two different locations, but both seem to be at the same place, possibly the Townhouse Bar. That was the last known spot they were before they were killed.
Right.
I mean, that's a pretty good narrowing down
Well, yeah, in a city like New York,
of information.
I think that gives them an idea that the commonalities between the two victims, I mean, that's always very important, right?
Now, on May 10th of 1993, Donald Gilbertson hoped to catch a glimpse of a blimp flying over an area in New Jersey. He drove to Crow Hill, which was a single-lane dirt road that was once a wagon trail. He passed what appeared to be a deer carcass, which wouldn't have been that strange because the site was known as a dumping ground for leaves, garbage, other debris. Yet after he was, kind of waiting around for this blimp to pass overhead, which I think is kind of funny because people get really excited when they see a blimp.
Well, yeah, they're awesome.
I know a time or two when I've seen a blimp, I get really excited. It's like seeing a hot air balloon.
Yeah.
I get excited.
Well, I think it's because you very seldom see a blimp.
We want to see a blimp.
That or they're also known as airships. They were quite a bit more popular back in the day. And it's just such a cool looking thing that you have this big object that is kind of defying gravity,
Yeah.
Even though it's made out of rather light materials and there's a reason it floats, obviously.
I know how
but-
Ice Cube felt when he saw the lights of the Goodyear blimp
Yeah.
and it said Ice Cube's a pimp.
I can't believe it said that, How did they know
Well, he's Ice Cube.
that Ice Cube was a pimp?
So when he passes by what he thinks is this deer carcass again, he sees human fingers.
Oh, my gosh.
That's when he immediately drives a mile home and calls the Manchester police. There was a left arm, bloodied and dirty on the road. The hand appeared to have a plastic bag in its grip. Police theorized that an animal had pulled the arm out of this bag, and that's kind of how it was exposed. Like the animal had torn the bag open and dragged.
Okay, and so
Yeah.
the arm and hands put into a bag, but then Rigga mortis starts setting in, and it's going to make the hand kind of draw up and clasp together.
Yeah, like a little G.I. Joe hand.
Yeah, and then it grabs the bag on the
little kung
inside.
fu grip.
But then an animal tears the bag away from the hand, and next thing you know, you got a hand holding a bag. Boom. Damn, dude.
I love when you break it down for us.
No, I'm saying that it makes sense.
So under the bag, they found a clothesline, which is strange. And then a few feet away, they were able to locate another arm. As in other discoveries, law enforcement located a total of 6 garbage bags, 30-gallon, dark green. Each contained human remains that had just been dumped in this area. The body was divided into 7 parts. There were 2 legs, and this is what's in each bag. So in one bag, there's 2 legs, 2 arms in another bag. In a third bag, there's a torso bisected horizontally across the abdomen. The head is in another bag. So, I mean, this killer is taking his time. And like in the other cases, you know, there were 6 or 8 garbage bags full of body parts.
So
which is horrific.
So
it's so brutal.
Basically, the bodies are being
gruesome.
disassembled in a similar fashion each time.
Yeah. This is just a grisly crime. These crimes. Now, the victim's face was mutilated beyond recognition. The book I read on this case described it as just being pulp.
Oh, my gosh.
So they weren't even kind of able to make out this person's face after, you know, I mean, it was just so bad. There were multiple stab wounds to the back and ligature marks around the victim's ankles. This victim had no identification. So unlike Mulcahy, because the killer had left Mulcahy's ID, like among this discarded parts and such. And then Peter Anderson's personal effects were dumped at a different site.
Right.
But this person had no ID. There was nothing. The head was contained in an Acme bag, which was from a supermarket chain. I guess Acme is a grocery store that we don't have here. There was little blood in the bag. The medical examiner noted that the body appeared to have been washed. The victim had several tattoos, including on the right hand between the index finger and the thumb, which was inked with Linda. Linda, listen, Linda.
Listen, Linda, listen.
Listen. On the left foot, written in cursive, was Fast Eddie.
Okay.
I want to be nicknamed Fast Eddie.
That's an awesome nickname.
The victim's fingerprints were entered into APHIS, but there were no hits. The fingerprints were sent to Philadelphia and New York, along with the FBI. Finally, a hit came back on a man named Eddie Ramos. The victim had an arrest record. In the mugshot taken in 1990, the man had thick dark hair and a mustache. And though he went by Eddie Ramos in New York, the victim was actually known as Anthony Edward Marrero in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Law enforcement could find little information about Marrero. He was born May 2nd, 1949 in Puerto Rico. He had lived around the Philadelphia area from 1969 to 1983 before moving to Manhattan, where he was a sex worker. His criminal record included pandering, loitering, and solicitation, with most arrests culminating around the New York Port Authority bus terminal. Now, this terminal, Dylan, had a history. It's a pretty, I guess, famous spot for sex work in New York City. People nicknamed it a hooker magnet.
Oh, that's a very descriptive nickname.
Well, from the terminal to 10 blocks north was called the Minnesota Strip, which was a reference to Midwestern girls who failed to make it on Broadway and ended up turning tricks along 8th Avenue. And this reminds me of the show The Deuce.
Right.
One of the pimps on the show, and it's a rapper. Is it Redman? I don't
remember.
I can't remember. Anyway, he specifically goes to this Port Authority bus terminal, like looking for a new girl. And there's this brunette who becomes one of the, I guess, main characters on the show. She steps off a bus there, and she's like from Minnesota, I think. And he immediately picks her up and like takes her out to breakfast. And the next thing you know, she's working for him. So it just kind of reminds me of that show. And it's like literally playing out on screen what actually did happen in New York, I guess, during this time period.
And isn't that crazy that you have these like kind of starry-eyed people male and female, getting off these buses from the Midwest or wherever, small town USA. In the big city, it's all hustling, bustling. They're staring around. You know, people can tell, I'm pretty sure, rather easily if you're not from the city.
Oh, you're a mark for sure.
Because if you're looking up at the buildings and things like that, I think
You're marveling at the city.
Yes.
Yes.
It's pretty obvious you're not from there. And then they're like, oh, hey, let me help you.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then they're not there to help you.
I think you would have a similar, there's like been a similar kind of story of Los Angeles. People stepping off the bus.
Right.
And then that's how they end up in like pornography, making adult films. And Poison wrote that song Fallen Angel about this.
Is that's what that's about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anywho. On the second floor of the bus terminal was a bathroom where Marrero had been working for as little as $10 a trick. A friend told law enforcement that Marrero went to what he called basic bars, like a leather establishment called Rawhide, which attracted blue-collar types.
Wow.
And that this was Anthony's bread and butter. He also worked Tricks, a bar in Hell's Kitchen. And though Anthony never hustled at the townhouse, he would work an area between Lexington Avenue and 53rd Street, which was only about a 9-minute walk from the bar. So law enforcement starts to think that maybe it wasn't so much he was at the townhouse, but he might have just been in the area and that the killer had left this bar and discovered him maybe along the way.
Right. Like maybe he struck out at the bar, didn't really find anybody to hook up with, and then he sees this guy on his way away from the bar.
Yes. Now, detectives were able to find a couple who worked on Broadway. It was a husband and wife. They were actors. And the husband often picked up Anthony. And the wife, she knew about these trysts. They were interviewed and they didn't have a lot of information to give law enforcement, but they did offer up a bag of his personal items that he had left behind, like the last time he'd been to their house. They told detectives there was a wealthy man from Connecticut who drove a Cadillac that drove down to the city and would whisk Anthony away for like a week at a time. But this Connecticut lead didn't really add up. They determined the man was elderly and quite frail, and there was no way he had the strength to dismember Marrero because he was basically just like a little old man.
So they tracked the old man down, or is this just from descriptions?
No, they were able to track him down.
Oh, wow. Oh, God.
But he's elderly and,
He's like, oh, I know Anthony. Oh.
Sure.
Driving a Cadillac.
That's,
Nice Cadillac.
Yeah.
I have lots of money.
Okay.
You want to go with me, copper?
Gosh, now you're making it sound like he's a weirdo.
Well,
like, get in my car with here's some candy and a puppy.
Yeah, we'll go to my library. I'll show you stuff.
Ah.
In the study.
Anthony's brother, they were able to locate him. His name was Lewis in Philadelphia. Now, he knew little about Anthony's life in New York and said sometimes his brother would just wander home, like out of the blue, and then leave. Like he would kind of show up unannounced, maybe spend a day or two.
And just kind of leave without
like
even
eating,
saying goodbye.
showering, sleeping, like a place to crash, seeing his family, and then just would bolt with no information. They didn't know where he went. The family knew about Anthony's career choice, but they seemed kind of embarrassed by it and even a bit in denial, saying that even though he was maybe doing sex work, they didn't think he was gay.
Well, I mean, and this is common with families, gay or not. This is common with families when they have loved ones involved in sex work. They kind of don't want, they have an idea of what's happening, but and they never discuss it with their loved one, and everybody just kind of don't ask, don't tell policy, and in their mind they can just kind of explain it away. Well, maybe they're doing this or that.
They're a Puerto Rican family. They're deeply religious,
rather
very,
conservative,
very Catholic, very conservative. On the Max documentary Last Call, Anthony's great nephew appears in the documentary and says that he is bisexual. And when he came out to his parents, they kicked him out.
Well, and that's
so
pretty
he's
harsh.
saying, like, he was like, this could be me. because this is how they treated my great uncle. This is how they're treating me. I mean, he's like, the family was ashamed. They didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to acknowledge it.
Even after his death, they still kind of
Yeah. I mean, here we are all these years later, and they still don't really, he said they don't talk about it. They don't bring him up, and they definitely won't discuss that he was potentially homosexual. Though the victimology was inconsistent, detectives theorized that this was the same killer. After tracing the Acme bag, one of the locations stood out, Dylan. There was a location, Acme grocery store on Staten Island.
What?
Yes. There were fingerprints, but they didn't match up in APHIS. So again, we keep getting fingerprints, but no hits.
Well, and that can, well, I mean, just the manner the bodies are left in is a pretty solid MO, right?
Right.
So, I mean, it's going to be hard to not think they're connected. And then these things, these items they're able to trace keep leading back to Staten Island.
Yes. One detective said, quote, "Here I've got a serial killer and he's never been arrested. This is nuts." In August of 1993, the New York Times published a story about the murders. A large portion of the article was about Anthony Marrero, but the article painted him as a drug addict with a failed marriage and as a petty criminal. According to his brother, who was interviewed for the article, Anthony's marriage failed due to his desire for men. He was considered transient. He traveled to California, Washington, then back to New York. Often the family didn't know where he was. Anthony, who was always immaculately dressed, would show up in these really expensive outfits and shoes, but didn't talk about how he was making money. And his family knew he didn't have a job and he was unemployed. So they were like, how is he always showing up in these like designer clothes, nice jewelry, nice watches, but no job?
No, I watched some of that Last Call with You, the docuseries, and somebody pointed out that their description in the paper of Anthony,
yes,
was quite different than the other two victims,
yes,
who were businessmen.
Absolutely.
And they were white.
Yes.
Now, but me and you all a lot of times have this discussion. Is it the fact that Anthony's not white, or is it affluence, that he's from a different socioeconomical rung on the ladder, if you will?
Well, there's that. And the fact that these two other men, I mean, they were professionals. They were businessmen. They had families.
Right.
And Anthony was transient. He was a prostitute. He was a sex worker, a crack user. So, you know, I mean, I think that doesn't make him any less important. But, you know, I think those sort of details are kind of salacious, and they sell newspaper headlines. They sell newspapers.
Yeah.
More so than, hey, you've got a banker who was killed.
Well, yeah.
People would rather hear about, ooh,
the crack addict.
this crack addict
this male prostitute
who's selling sex in a bus bathroom.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah.
Right.
Right?
So, yeah, okay. I
don't know.
I'm not saying it's right, but
no,
I'm
not saying
why.
it's right or wrong either. But a lot of times I think people kind of run with this one narrative when there's probably
more at play.
Yeah. I mean, everything's not just so black and white. Now, at some point, Anthony had been invited as a young man to a day-long tryout for the Philadelphia Phillies, and that was something that he was very proud of. Like, his family said that was probably one of his biggest, like, moments of pride.
Well, yeah, that's awesome.
Because
to be invited as a walk-on into a professional team.
So I guess as a young man, he had really wanted to play professional baseball. So meanwhile, while all of this is happening, there's a group in Chelsea, neighborhood of New York, called the New York Anti-Violence Project. They're a nonprofit group, and they're pretty upset with everything that's happening. And they're featured in the Last Call docuseries. There's a lot of interviews with the folks who are involved in this organization.
And there was a lot of other issues going on in the gay community.
Right.
There was a lot of, pushing for rights, like you described the police chief or whatever having a heavy-handed approach to the gay community, raiding bars, cracking heads. So, and then you have these murders happening in amongst all these other issues. And so they were already kind of a lot to be protesting or speaking out against.
Yes. Yeah. Well, the city had become an increasingly violent place for the queer community. In 1991, there were over 600 cases of violence targeting gays. This was just in New York City alone. Gay bashing was common, but not considered a hate crime in the 80s and 90s. And if you're unfamiliar with gay bashing, I mean, this is where like people would intentionally go out looking for queer folk.
Yeah, 3 or 4 or 5 dudes.
And just beat the shit out of them,
Yeah.
like almost kill them.
Right.
Just for fun.
Just for fun.
I mean, it's disgusting.
It's terrible. I used to, this really hurt my soul back in the day when I would see things like this. You know? It blew me away that
People are so mean.
people were harming someone over this. And
I mean, it's not unlike what was happening in the black community
no.
before civil rights and even during civil rights, where, you know, men and women were lynched and picked up off the street and murdered simply because they were black and
walking down the road. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had gay couples
Just being
afraid
targeted.
to show affection in public, afraid to walk down the street holding hands or kissing. And it's a really ridiculous, scary thing to have to deal with.
Many of these attacks that were happening in New York City at the time were called pickup crimes, where a victim would be attacked after leaving the bar with a stranger. So these perpetrators, these assailants, would intentionally go to a gay bar and pick up someone
At gay.
like, come home with me
Mm-hmm.
with this intention of, hey, we're going to have sex or, you know, whatever. And then once they leave the bar, the person turns and just beats the shit out of somebody. I mean, it's so fucked up.
It is.
It's ridiculous. It makes no sense. So this was exacerbated by the fact that police were disinterested or just downright hostile toward the LGBTQ community. They had the attitude that sodomy was a crime, and there was rampant homophobia just prevalent throughout the ranks of the New York Police Department. Many officers had an attitude that queer people were, quote, getting what they deserved.
What?
So if you're the victim of a violent crime, it's because you deserved it, because you're gay.
I mean, they've been doing this to women for a long time. Hey, you were in that.
You were asking for it.
You were asking for it in that slutty outfit.
How dare you be breathing on the sidewalk with a vagina?
Yeah, I mean, what you made him do it, or
Yeah.
you were asking for it. Just the fact that grown adult people can go around and have kind of these unspoken rules like this.
Prejudices. I mean,
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's very low intelligence. Okay,
I agree.
It's very low intelligence. You're not a reasonable person, and I don't think intelligent people would be like that.
Well, watching that docuseries, it was like infuriating.
Well, it's like when you hate all black people for just being black, or if you did have an incident. That's the other thing that would kill me when you hear these people with these stories like, well, one time these, 3 or 4 black guys jumped me and beat me up, or, stole my car or some shit. You're going to disparage a whole race? Oh, you're going to hold them accountable for what this one little group of people did? That's a very dumb, ignorant way to react to something.
Well, Dylan, I have been the victim of a violent crime that was perpetrated by, you said, 4 black men. Well, there were 4 black men who jumped me and my friend in Raleigh, North Carolina. This was about 2003, and assaulted us, tried to rob us. I was able to break free. Now, one of these men just walked up and punched me in the face.
Oh, my God.
Like, so hard, it knocked me down on the ground, and I saw stars. I was like, whoa, like a cartoon character. And I got up and ran because we were very close to my friend's apartment, and ran inside the apartment and was screaming for help the whole way. His roommates were there and were able to kind of jump up, and at first they didn't know what I was carrying on about. But in the meantime, my friend is out on the sidewalk being beaten by this group of men. Broke his ribs, fucked up his eye, hurt his hand. Like, we had to go to the hospital, the emergency room. It was a big deal, right? And but they were able to get in their car and pull away before these guys ran out to try to help.
Right.
But it was very scary. And that's the first time I've ever really experienced, like, that kind of random violence.
Right.
And it was terrifying. But you know what? It didn't make me racist.
Yeah, it's not going to make you hate.
It didn't make me hate. It made me hate this group of people for doing a shitty thing. But I didn't look at them and think you did this because you're black,
No.
or I hate black people because this thing happened to me. I mean, that's absurd.
You did it. They did it because they're
thought
shitty
these are
people.
shitty people,
Yeah.
and the fact that they were black men didn't have anything to do with the crime. They were, but they were just shitty people who are criminals who did this thing to me. But it's never made me like feel any type of way. I mean, you and I both, we've marched and have tried to make our voices heard and be allies when it comes to like Black Lives Matter back in 2020.
Yeah.
But we've never, I feel like, ever taken that and been like, oh. I mean, it's just when you do that, it's gross.
You're dumb.
And you're dumb.
You're a dumb person who's looking for an excuse to espouse racist bullshit. And you're going back to this thing that might or might not have actually happened to you, because I suspect sometimes those people are lying about the event that started their racism, if you will. But it's just and no.
Well, I could have easily been attacked by any group of
Doesn't
men.
matter
I mean,
if
it
it's-
wouldn't have mattered. I
Yeah.
mean, it was just that 4 men decided they thought they could rob us. I mean, but it could have easily been a group of white men. I mean, I don't look at it and think, oh, it's just this group of people.
Well, I always wonder about people
So
like,
I don't get that at all.
I wonder about what if a group of that was one Asian guy, one Hispanic guy, one white guy, one black guy attacked them and beat them up,
and one gay guy.
and one gay guy. Now they're got to hate everybody.
Oh God, what if he was a gay black like Jew or something?
Oh, Jesus. His last name's Stein.
Then you got to hate everybody.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot of hate.
Yeah.
It's not enough time in the day.
It makes no sense. Well, this nonprofit had determined there were 151 homicides in 29 states in just 2 years. I think from like 91 to 93. And they were all targeting the queer community. So there was definitely like hate crimes happening at this time, but they were not considered hate crimes. And this community was definitely being targeted in a violent way. So, I mean, I can understand the outrage, not only in New York City, but all over the country.
So that's the atmosphere that the country's in at the moment. And now you have these horrific murders happening to people from your community. And it seems like it's one part possibly the cops not being like, oh, it's just it's a gross gay guy or whatever, the victim. But I think another part is they don't have a lot to go on. See, this happens sometimes. People make assumptions. It's a tricky case to solve even if you wanted to.
Well, I could kind of see both sides of it because
Yeah, but-
after the murders, there was a spark of fear in the village. Everyone was vulnerable. This group organized a bar safe campaign, distributing safety tips such as don't let desperation rule your night. So like if you were hooking up, Dylan, they would recommend that you introduce your pickup, like the person you're hooking up with, if it's a stranger to you, especially to a bartender or
to
a
other
friend,
friends.
to like say to the bartender, hey, this is Larry and I just wanted you to meet them, wink, wink kind of thing.
Right.
Because
okay.
oftentimes the bartenders, I mean, a lot of these people are regulars. They kind of know who you are. And then if police come calling, they can say, well, he left with this guy, It's,
Well, yeah.
It's kind of letting someone know. So just like kind of letting someone know, communicating, that sort of thing. So with Anthony's murder, law enforcement theorized it was about sudden availability to commit the crime, that it was more of a crime of opportunity, given the fact that the first victims were kind of different than Marrero. So they thought that this perpetrator, whoever this killer was, had maybe gone to the bar, like the townhouse, and maybe struck out, as you said, but was itching to kill somebody, right? Looking for a victim, but didn't get one. And on the way out, maybe ran into Marrero working the street nearby and picked him up.
Someone's willing to quickly, without a lot of discussion,
Yes.
go with him, which is why sex workers have always been targeted by violent people.
Yeah. Now, gay rights advocates were angry that the New York Police Department seemed to be doing nothing. Yet the NYPD felt the crime scenes were out of their jurisdictions. You've got New Jersey, you've got Pennsylvania, And they didn't really want to add more murders to their expansive list of unsolved murders and crimes in the city, and they didn't want to allocate their resources.
And that's not exclusive to New York City.
And that's not exclusive to this just being, well, they're just doing this because it's it's these gay men.
No, that would be true of
because
any
we
homicide.
see all the time, Dylan, that these jurisdictions get into disputes or pissing contests over who gets the case, and they're not very willing to work together or share information. But eventually, the NYPD is going to join with these other agencies, and they're going to develop a task force to find the person that will be dubbed the last call killer.
See, though these crimes are horrific, that's a great newspaper name for a killer. I mean, that's better than John Doe duffel bag, right?
Yeah.
Duffel bag John Doe or whatever the fuck it was.
But, I see both sides of it. I can understand why this community is feeling failed by law enforcement. I mean, they've been victimized by law enforcement. They've not been taken seriously. And they have someone preying on members of their community. And they don't even have, law enforcement out patrolling these bars, checking in, or even making it known that, hey, everyone needs to be careful. We've got a killer on the loose.
Well, law enforcement has already failed them on many fronts.
Yes.
So it's only natural to feel like it's here we go again, even though now, we're being openly hunted and murdered in this horrific fashion.
And what a scary time to be out and about in the city.
I know.
When you are, being hunted and preyed upon. Simply because of your, sexual preference. I mean, it's very scary. Also, I think when we look at any kind of serial killer case, Dylan, law enforcement is never eager to jump on the, hey, we have a serial killer bandwagon.
No.
It's the last thing they want to admit. I mean, we've seen cases where you have 11, 12, 13 victims before they will publicly acknowledge, you know what, we may have a serial killer problem.
They are so reluctant.
They do not want to say those words.
They do not, because it turns it into something else. You get a lot of public pressure and backlash to do something.
A lot of outcry.
You get a lot of outcry, let alone how it may affect the local economy, as far as tourism or business and things like that. And they a
lot of times these departments maybe don't have the financial resources to allocate to all the things you would need to fund hunting a serial killer.
Yeah, and that would not be the case in the New York division, because they are one of the most moneyed police divisions.
I heard recently what the police budget is in New York City.
Almost that's $1 billion plus.
I think it is, and because it blew my mind.
Yeah.
I was like, "Are you fucking?"
I think it's
kidding
1.2
me?
or $3 billion.
That's really how much money is going to fund a city that's 14. I mean, the whole island is only 14 miles.
Yeah.
Or I mean, it's just crazy.
That's crazy
to think of all those people living in such a small area and having this massive, massive, massive police force and this budget that's probably more than most states' police budget is in a year.
Oh, I guarantee it. Possibly. Or as much or more.
Yeah.
For this one small, you're talking 7, 8 square miles or something like that.
It's outrageous.
I don't know how all those people exist in one tiny area like that. I just don't understand how it works.
Well, I don't know. When we were watching the documentary and it kept showing the city, and I said to you, because you've never been to New York, I was like, can you imagine being there, Dylan, where all you see are these skyscrapers and these buildings are just right on top of each other, and it's so busy and crowded, and New York never sleeps. I mean, people are out on the streets at 4 a.m. hanging out, carrying on, and you were like, no.
No. I've never even really been in any big city. I've been in Atlanta, but I think it's quite a bit different setup in Atlanta than most big cities. It's a lot more spread out, more of a metropolitan area. You're
just a small town boy.
But no, I don't know how it would work. And it seems like it'd be a lot of noise.
Yeah, you're not so sure it's for you, are you?
And I think there'd be smells involved.
Yeah, smells of like street vending hot dogs.
Well, that
Vendors with
sounds
hot
good.
dogs and pizza.
Well, see, that sounds
Hell
good.
yeah.
But then you get urine and stuff.
And I would love to have a big New York dog
You want a big dog?
or like a Chicago style dog.
You want a big fat sausage? Yeah.
No, I just want a hot dog, Dylan.
You want it
Thanks.
smothered?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put me some kraut,
Oh,
some, I don't know,
I thought it was going to be smothered in underwear.
mustard and relish and ketchup,
Damn, I want a big
Kraut.
dog. I want a big fat sausage too.
chili, and
Shit.
some onions. Just put
Wow.
everything on it.
Okay.
Now I'm hungry.
Now I'm hungry.
Well, Dylan, this is going to conclude part 1 of The Last Call Killer, and we will have part 2
Okay.
next week.
I can't wait because I want them to catch this son of a bitch. I hope that happens.
I hope it happens too, Dylan.
Okay.
But until then, you should just anticipate the part 2.
I'm anticipating getting a hot dog in my mouth now.
Yeah, I know. Okay, bye.
Bye.